Live from the campus of Hillsdale College in beautiful Hillsdale, Michigan. This is Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on the Steve Gruber Show. It's Thursday, May 1st, 2025, and here are three big things you need to know. One, Ukraine and the United States have signed a minerals agreement. Comes almost 2 months after a White House meeting between Presidents Trump and Zelensky derailed talks on that deal. Zelensky had declined to sign the previous proposals for that deal, which requires Ukraine to relinquish a share of its future oil, gas, and revenue minerals in exchange for continued U.S. support. 2. Ford is extending its employee pricing sale until at least July 4th. Company's CEO announced the extension on Wednesday, the automaker trying to encourage sales to customers who might be nervous about rising prices because of new tariffs on imported cars and auto parts. And number 3, if you have not been following the exploits of Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, well, we're going to get you up to speed this morning. The Democrat billionaire likely to run for president in 2028. He's cozying up to the AOC wing of the party. We'll hear a lot from Pritzker here in just a few moments because he's been on a roll lately. That is where we start hour one of the Steve Gruber Show. Thanks so much for being alongside. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve this morning. Always a privilege and pleasure to sit in for the great man. I am here at Hillsdale College. Our term just ended yesterday. Finals begin tomorrow. Commencement next weekend with Victor Davis Hanson giving our commencement speech next weekend. We'll be happy to see him here on campus once again. You can find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM. Also, scottbertram.com, where I try to corral all my media doings. You might see me filling in here. I host some podcasts for the college here, including the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. Also host a show called Political Beats with my friend Jeff Blair over at National Review and wherever you find your audio. We talk with people in politics about their favorite band or musical artist. Ton of fun. Just released a Brian Eno this week. That's an interesting episode. And then also a show called Wasn't That Special? 50 Years of SNL. My co-host there, Christian Schneider, and I going back through. We watch every single episode, report to you season by season what was good, what wasn't, who was funny, who wasn't. But you can track American comedy, American history, American culture through watching a lot of what happened on that program. So that's all out there. You can find it. Really happy to be here with you today. The show, of course, stevegruber.com and over on X at Steve Gruber Show. All right, this hour, after the bottom of the hour, we'll talk with Mike Hahn, a Republican strategist, about the danger of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and that wing of the party, and might she be a danger in the presidential race for 2028. Before we get to AOC, we have to talk about a politician who is embracing the hard left AOC wing of the party as he makes a potential run for president in 2028, and that's Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. I don't know how closely you've been following him, if you even know of him, have heard his name. He's been out there this week because of something he said. That's like low on the list here. We've got to go back in time here. J.B. Pritzker, I was born and bred in Illinois, as you might know, moved to Michigan about 10 years ago, and so I'm still very in tune with Illinois politics. J.B. Pritzker is a billionaire. J.B. Pritzker has been governor of Illinois now for almost 8 years. He's not made a decision whether or not he'll run for re-election or perhaps go whole hog into the presidential race. We shall see. But he's definitely interested and is definitely making an attempt to run for the nomination, at least trying to position himself to make a run for the nomination. And in doing so, he is embracing some of the hardest left elements of his party. And we're going to hear a lot of audio here this morning. One of the overarching points is if this were a Republican, there would be breaking news coverage on CNN every time he spoke. There'd be primetime town hall specials about how J.B. Pritzker, the Republican, is saying things that are tearing apart a republic and perhaps inciting violence. But he's not. He's a Democrat with eyes in the White House. He's a billionaire, and so the media doesn't lay a glove on him. We're going to tell you, show you what he's been saying and why it perhaps should be quite concerning to you. We got to go back a couple of months. If you were with me, one of the last times I filled in, we talked about this. J.B. Pritzker, at his budget address this year for Illinois, which was a couple of months ago, uh, he decided to talk about the Trump administration just after President Trump took the oath of office a second time and compared Donald Trump and the Trump administration to a Nazi regime, pretty much straight out. So we'll hear a bit here. This is J.B. Pritzker during the budget address a couple of months in Illinois on Donald Trump and Nazis. Cut one.
I do not invoke the specter of Nazis lightly, but I know the history intimately and have spent more time than probably anyone in this room with people who survived the Holocaust. Here's what I've learned. The root that tears apart your house's foundation begins as a seed of distrust and hate and blame. The seed that grew into a dictatorship in Europe a lifetime ago didn't arrive overnight. It started with everyday Germans mad about inflation and looking for someone to blame. I'm watching with a foreboding dread what is happening in our country right now.
Everyday Germans mad about inflation looking for someone to blame. Making that direct comparison to you, everyday Americans, mad about inflation looking for someone to blame. J.B. Pritzker is very concerned you're going to turn into a Nazi. He's not done. 6 different times in this budget address, he compared Trump to not invoke Nazis 6 different times in making this comparison between the Trump administration and the Nazi regime. Cut 2 here from J.B. Pritzker.
What comes next? After we've discriminated against, deported, or disparaged all the immigrants and the gay and lesbian and transgender people, the developmentally disabled, the women, and the minorities, once we've ostracized our neighbors and betrayed our friends, after that, when the problems we started with are still there staring us in the face, what comes next? All the atrocities of human history lurk in the answer to that question. And if we don't want to repeat history, then for God's sake, in this moment, we better be strong enough to learn from it.
All the atrocities in human history come for the question, what comes next? He thinks we're at that moment of what comes next. He thinks that you and I and others who support Donald Trump are going to be led into a Nazi regime, led to support a Nazi regime. This is what J.B. Pritzker thinks is happening across the country and why you supported Donald Trump for president. One more cut here from the budget address. We'll come back and hear more from J.B. Pritzker. He doesn't stop here. This is J.B. Pritzker again, budget address a couple of months ago, governor of Illinois, cut 3.
If you think I'm overreacting and sounding the alarm too soon, consider this. It took the Nazis 1 month, 3 weeks, 2 days, 8 hours, and 40 minutes to dismantle a constitutional republic. And all I'm saying is that when the 5-alarm fire starts to burn, every good person better be ready to man a post with a bucket of water if you want to stop it from raging out of control.
All right, that's J.B. Pritzker. I don't know if he has a countdown on his desk. 1 month, 3 weeks, 2 days, 8 hours. Well, by this point, we've passed that mark in the Trump administration, so maybe Pritzker's breathing a bit easier. But he didn't stop there. He's been very much in the news the past week with more incendiary comments. We'll hear those next. Scott Bertram in for Steve on The Steve Gruber Show. Fram sitting in for Steve here on this Thursday morning. Mike Hahn will join us after the bottom of the hour. A Republican strategist will talk about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and possibility of 2028. On 2028, spending a little time this morning looking at Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, the Democrat billionaire who's likely to run for president in 2028. His rhetoric is heating up very quickly. We saw his budget address a couple of months ago, actually, in which he invoked Nazi regime, comparing the Trump administration to a Nazi regime, and concerned that people who were foolish and were tricked into voting for Donald Trump because they were afraid of high inflation now we're going to be wrapped up in his authoritarian fascist ways. That's where he started to position himself. Well, he started actually last year as well, but particularly this year, where he started to embrace the far left wing of the party, and that has not stopped, as you will soon hear. So he sets the table. He sets the table by saying Donald Trump is a Nazi. The Trump administration is a Nazi administration. And so, what does that mean? That means virtually any kind of resistance would be appropriate because of how evil that regime is. In fact, as he would say a couple of weeks ago, the way you deal with Donald Trump is you punch him in the face. That's what the guy like Donald Trump needs. He's a Nazi, as J.B. Pritzker said during his budget address. Again, J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois, likely 2028 candidate. Cut 4 here.
Never before in my life have I called for mass protests, for mobilization, for disruption. But I am now. These Republicans cannot know a moment of peace. They have to understand that we will fight their cruelty with every megaphone and microphone that we have. We must castigate them on the soapbox and then punish them at the ballot box.
J.B. Pritzker, that actually is from earlier this week. I called for the wrong cut. My fault. But telling us that Republicans cannot know a moment of peace out there. They've got to be everywhere. And what does it mean to not know a moment of peace? As I mentioned previously, if you go back a couple of weeks, J.B. Pritzker saying people like Donald Trump need to be punched in the face. Cut 5 here.
Bending to the whims of a bully will not end his cruelty. It will only embolden him. The response to authoritarianism isn't acquiescence. Bullies respond to one thing, and one thing only: a punch in the face.
Bullies respond to a punch in the face. Donald Trump runs a Nazi regime. Republicans shouldn't know a moment of peace. Get out there, and what do they need? They need a punch in the face. This is Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, and I want you to imagine a Republican saying similar things about Kamala Harris, any leading Democrat. As I said, there would be CNN primetime specials. They would turn this person into another, just say, Marjorie Taylor Greene, ostracized from polite politics, would not be referenced in a serious manner in terms of a candidate for president, but no one cares because he is a billionaire Democrat. J.B. Pritzker doesn't stop there. That cut you saw where he said no moment of peace for any Republican is from earlier in the week. 2 nights ago, Tuesday night, he was on this town hall put on by Midas Touch, which is a far left media outlet. He was on with a couple of other governors. J.B. Pritzker on Tuesday night telling Democrats, activists, to go to the offices of Republican politicians. Cut 11.
And that, in fact, is one of the things I want to say to everybody that's listening. If you're not out there protesting in front of a Republican congressman's office, or out in the street making your voice heard, or calling your friends in another state to have them do it, or showing up in Washington, D.C. in front of their offices, those Republican congressmen, then you're not doing what's necessary to put pressure on them to vote the right way.
If you're not showing up at local district offices, if you're not showing up in Washington, D.C., and standing outside the offices of Republican politicians and not letting them know a moment of peace, and maybe punching them in the face because they're part of a support system of a Nazi regime, then you're not doing enough. says Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. Where will he go next? What will he say next? A responsible media would begin talking about this guy's, they'd call it a track record of a pattern of careless rhetoric. A guy who is not interested in bringing us together, but is fanning the flames of hate. This is the way he'd be referred to if he were a Republican, but he's not. He's a billionaire Democrat. And speaking of being a billionaire, he talked with Dave Weigel of Semaphore earlier this week on the topic of oligarchy, because again, he is a billionaire governor who wants to be president. He said oligarchy is a group of the most powerful people in society who are trying to impose their will on everyone else and make them pay for what the oligarchs are unwilling to pay for. Now, this is very rich, no pun intended. J.B. Pritzker, a billionaire heir to a hotel fortune. You know what he did once in Chicago? He has multiple mansions. One of his mansions, he was rehabbing. And in order to dodge taxes, J.B. Pritzker went to this mansion and took out all the toilets from the mansion. And this is, you can find this is everywhere. Took out all the toilets from his mansion so he would not have to pay the same amount of property taxes, because a home without a toilet is not considered, it's considered uninhabitable. So he paid hundreds of thousands of dollars less than he should have in property taxes simply by removing toilets from his mansion. A guy who's complaining about oligarchs who refuse to pay for things they want to impose on society. J.B. Pritzker appeals to the left. Just a short time here. Because what he's telling them is they are right, and they simply didn't fight hard enough. He's saying you don't have to change anything. You can be who you are. You can be who you want to be. You just didn't fight hard enough, and you weren't loud enough about the things you want to do to Americans across this country. That's why he's dangerous. That's why this rhetoric is dangerous. That's why you should keep a sharp eye on J.B. Pritzker as this campaign rolls on. Scott Bertram in for Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram in for Steve on the Steve Gruber Show on this Thursday morning. Thanks so much for joining us all across Michigan and across the country. Find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM. I'm here at Hillsdale College. As I mentioned, classes came to an end yesterday. Finals start tomorrow, commencement next weekend. But you never have to stop learning from Hillsdale College thanks to our great online courses, free online courses for you. You've heard all of it before about capitalism. Capitalism is evil. Capitalism is, well, what even is capitalism? That's a big question. And Hillsdale College can help you understand. If everyone's talking about capitalism, perhaps you should know a thing about it and understand it. That's where Hillsdale College comes in. There's a brand new free online course, Understanding Capitalism, taught by my friend, Dr. Charles Steele, one of our great economists here on campus. In just 7 fast, fascinating lectures, you'll dive into profit and loss, human nature and freedom, and why capitalism isn't a system of greed, a system of morality and liberty. And that's just one of only 40, of almost 40 free online courses offered by Hillsdale College. There's no tuition and no strings. They're free to sign up, free to take. Take them at your own pace whenever it's convenient for you. Go now to Gruber4Hillsdale.com to enroll. It's easy, free, and it's ready whenever you are. That's Gruber4Hillsdale.com. Gruber, F-O-R, Hillsdale.com for all of our free online courses, including the latest one on capitalism, Understanding Capitalism with Dr. Charles Steele, available at Gruber4Hillsdale.com. Coming up after the break, we'll talk with Mike Hahn, a Republican strategist. Should the right be concerned? Should conservatives be concerned about Alexandria Ocasio Cortez and the possibility that she has the momentum and she has the energy and she is the candidate that the left might want to embrace at 2028? We'll ask him about that, and with perhaps other candidates like J.B. Pritzker will adopt the rhetoric of Alexandria Ocasio Cortez in the run up to the next nomination. See, the presidential cycle never really stops, does it? Scott Bertram in for Steve. It's the Steve Gruber Show. It's the Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on this Thursday morning. Thanks so much for being alongside. Joined now by Mike Hahn, a Republican strategist, two-time Team Trump alum, also formerly with the NRSC as well. You can find more at frontlinestrategies.co. Mike, thanks so much for jumping on with us on the Steve Gruber Show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And if X is correct, a happy birthday to you as well.
I appreciate that. That's very nice of you. Thank you.
Talking a bit this morning about AOC, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, her influence on the Democratic Party. A lot of jockeying for position and a lot of jockeying for leadership right now among the Democrats. There's no real leader. Kamala Harris lost the election. She had a big speech last night. No one really cares. But they are looking for someone to step up and be the person who leads the party, both in terms of messaging and energy ahead of the midterms and ahead of 2028. Is AOC going to be that person for the left?
I actually didn't even have any clue that Kamala spoke last night either. But um, uh, look, AOC put up a fantastic first quarter when it comes to fundraising. She did 9.6 million. I think her average donation was $20. She claims none of it was from lobbyists or corporate PACs. I mean, those are presidential level numbers. At Frontline, I work with quite a few congressmen and congresswomen on the Republican side. None of them came anywhere near putting up those types of numbers. So I think this is certainly a signal of how far left the Democrat Party is moving. The fact of the matter is, she has a pulse on a base, and it's a very strong base. I mean, I'm looking also at crowds. She's pulling Trump 2016 type crowds in places like Idaho and these red areas. So she should be taken very seriously. She's no longer the laughing stock that we all thought she was just 5 years ago. She needs to be taken seriously. And with folks like David Hogg at the DNC, there's a very real possibility that she could be the nominee of the Democrat Party come 2028.
Maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't. But if we decide to take AOC seriously, well, let's take a serious look at her record. Has she been effective? Has she gotten things done during her time as a member of the U.S. House?
I couldn't name one thing that she's gotten done other than create a ton of problems for the Democrat establishment and given us Republicans tons and tons of talking points. So I hope she stays around forever.
We just spent some time here on the show, Mike, talking about Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, who's getting more and more unhinged in his rhetoric, comparing the Trump administration to a Nazi regime, saying that Trump's a guy that needs to be punched in the face, saying that Republicans shouldn't know a moment of peace, telling Democrats and activists to go out to Republican offices locally and go to D.C. and stand in front of offices in D.C. Is Pritzker a guy who understands? Because you've got Newsom who's apologizing. You've got Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan who's kind of hanging out with Trump and saying, I can work with this guy. Pritzker's one of the leading candidates for 28 who seems to be embracing the kind of AOC rhetoric that says, we're right. We just have to be louder about it.
Well, he's wrong, but he's absolutely smart to be doing that because that's where the party's moving right now. Whether we like it or not, the party is moving further left. They cannot handle the fact that Donald Trump won twice. We're now in control of obviously all of government. They're going to continue to move left because there's a part of the Democrat Party that believes that the old plans are not working. So he's smart to do so. He probably has some pretty good advisors. I know he's a very rich guy, but here's the fact of the matter. Here's what's really interesting is that I think AOC is going to need someone like a Gretchen Whitmer on her ticket if she does run for president, because I don't think that the Democrats are going to go full blown socialist. They're going to need someone from the Midwest to try and equalize the ticket a bit. So I would actually rather be Gretchen Whitmer as opposed to JB Pritzker right now, because it looks like AOC is certainly on the path to the nomination. And right now, it's just a fight over who's going to be on the ticket with her.
Mike Hahn is with us, Republican strategist, more at frontlinestrategies.co. For those who might say, it's kind of overblown, the left would never nominate someone like AOC. You don't have to go that far back to see how successful Bernie Sanders was in nearly grabbing the nomination for Democrats and how successful he's been on this anti oligarchy tour he's been doing even today. Can AOC learn and adjust from the strategies that Bernie Sanders used in his quest for the nomination?
Yeah, you bring up a great point. I mean, Bernie Sanders was all but the Democrat nominee in 2016 if it wasn't for the DNC totally rigging it for Hillary Clinton. So, for anyone saying it's not possible, it's entirely possible. And it's all going to come down to who's at the DNC and how far the party nationally wants to move. And I mentioned this at the beginning of the hit, but someone like David Hogg would support an AOC candidacy. That is how far the left has moved. They put someone like him in a leadership position to make those types of decisions. So it is absolutely a real possibility. And also money talks. And if you're raising $10 million in quarter one of the off year, people are going to be paying attention to that.
Mike, what do you make of Democrats and their approach or relationship now with Chuck Schumer in the Senate? There are many who are critical of him and his acquiescence to the Trump administration with the recent budget talks, and some people called for him to step down. He's not going to do that. He might invite a challenge. Does Alexandria Ocasio Cortez first battle Chuck Schumer before perhaps making a run for the White House?
I think she has her sights on something much bigger, but I certainly don't think Chuck Schumer survives a serious challenge. I mean, I think we're looking at a Joe Biden situation there. He looks like he's in serious decline. I'm seeing these videos of Chuck Schumer, and he just looks old and out of it. So I don't think he survives a serious primary challenge, but I think AOC has her eyes set on something much bigger than that.
Let's look before we get to 2028, 2026 midterms, which are right around the corner, but not that far away. Time keeps slipping into the future, as Steve Miller once said. Um, what will Republicans learn from midterms? Meaning, we don't know how they're going to go. We might not even know what the issues are at this point. But with a midterm election like this in the middle of a Trump administration, that there cannot be a third Trump term, of course. So there's going to be an open competition for the Republican nomination in 2028. What will the midterms tell us, do you think?
Yeah, the midterms are going to tell us a lot. So the NRCC actually just came out with polling this week showing that they're in a pretty favorable spot in a lot of the districts that they're in. Obviously, the Democrat Party's approval rating is totally underwater, so that's some good news coming out of the House if you're a Republican. Look, I think the messaging from Republicans is going to be, do you want the Trump term to end 2 years early? Because if Democrats get control of either house, what they're going to do is absolutely stall his agenda. And no matter what house they get, they're going to be calling for impeachments and investigations. And it's just going to totally derail the last 2 years of the Trump presidency. So if you voted for Trump in 2024, you should vote Republican again in 2026, so you could allow him to finish out the last 2 years of his term without any type of Democrat obstruction that they're bound to bound to do to the president.
And very quickly, Mike, we'll talk about this a bit later on in today's program, too, for our listeners. But do you think that by and large, people who voted for Trump in November 2024 still support Trump in May of 25? Has there been anything happening that perhaps his supporters would sour on him before?
No, I think that where that's coming from is questions over the tariffs and the small economic blip right now that we might be in. But I think most Trump supporters are smart to know that sometimes it gets worse before it gets better.
Hmm.
I think that people elected the president on the economy. It's only been 100 days in office. Let him finish out what he needs to do, and I'm confident that by the end of his term, he will have one of the strongest economies in American history. But I certainly don't know anyone who's voted for Trump that regrets it. Just anecdotally.
Mike Hahn, Republican strategist. Find him at frontlinestrategies.co, frontlinestrategies.co. And happy birthday, Mike. We appreciate you jumping on with us here on the Steve Gruber Show.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. That's Mike Hahn. Again, frontlinestrategies.co. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. This is the Steve Gruber Show. It's the Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on this Thursday morning. Thanks so long for being with us. Thanks so much for being with us for so long. Steve is back tomorrow with you on the program. We'll hear in a bit a little bit of the 100-day cabinet meeting that Donald Trump held yesterday. Wanted to quickly play. Kamala Harris spoke last night. I told our guest Mike Hahn about that, and I'm not planning to play anything. She apparently had another great word salad moment. No one is just thirsting to hear from Kamala Harris and what she thinks about the situation. She was weighed and measured and rejected by Americans against Donald Trump in November. I know she thinks she has a future, perhaps running for president again, or maybe governor of California. Boy, I just don't know about that. And I don't think a speech like last night is going to move the needle or make her reappear on the main stage in American politics. Tim Walz thinks he does have a future, and apparently Democrats do too, because they've been sending it out on these junkets across the country. You saw him last month talking and saying it's great that Tesla stock is going down, even though the pension funds in Minnesota owned a bunch of Tesla stock. Right, this is the kind of guy we're dealing with. Tim Walz yesterday. This is Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, who, by the way, I guess does some governor stuff at some point during the month, even though he's out on all these tours. Was speaking and saying, explaining why he was picked as vice president. Listen to Tim Walz explain this. Cut 10.
Look, my job was to do it. Look, I knew I was on the ticket. I would argue because we did a lot of amazing progressive things in Minnesota that improved people's lives. But I also was on the ticket, quite honestly, because I could code talk to white guys watching football, fixing their truck, doing that I could put them at ease. I was the permission structure to say, look, you can do this and vote for this. And you look across those swing states, with the exception of Minnesota, we didn't get enough of those votes.
But you could be giving them permission on TV every day. You could have been messaging that way, and that isn't necessarily how it shook out.
Well, yes, but I also said I understand myself. I said I think I'll give you pretty good stuff, but I'll also give you 10% problematic. And so somebody's got to make the decision here to handle some of this stuff and to make it. And those are just decisions that were made. And I think after the fact, it is not second guessing or anything. I think it's fair to go back on and look at this. Look, we had the most qualified person who'd run for president in this country's history at the top of the ticket.
The most qualified person in this country's history at the top of the ticket. Man, that's a disqualifying statement if I ever heard one. Tim Walz, though, admitting what a failure he is. I missed it the first time I heard that cut where he says at the beginning, I was on the ticket because I could talk to white guys. I knew how to change oil on a car. I could talk football. Even though, recall, he was playing this video game with AOC and said she can run a mean pick six play, which doesn't really exist in football. Those things just kind of happen. But anyway, I was the permission structure for white guys to vote for Kamala Harris. And then in the next breath says, look, we didn't get enough of those votes. So the reason he was placed on the ticket, he admits he couldn't do the job and gather enough of those votes to actually help Kamala Harris win the presidency, and then doubles down at the end by saying, oh man, most qualified presidential nominee in our country's history is Kamala Harris. Man, oh man, Tim Walz. I hope he does stick around. Our guest Mike Hahn said he hopes AOC sticks around because it's good fodder for us on the right. And man, Tim Walz can have some fun with him and his comments if he continues to be on the national stage. Speaking of having fun, Donald Trump, the Trump administration certainly has been doing so in these first 100 days of his presidency. Yesterday, a cabinet meeting held. Elon Musk was there, not around the table, but he was at the meeting. He wore two hats. Donald Trump said he liked the fact he was wearing two hats, one on top of the other. But Donald Trump yesterday at the beginning of this meeting, talking about, first of all, a little bit on the tariffs and how his administration is dealing with China right now. This is President Trump yesterday on China dealings, cut 7.
And I don't want this to happen, but I know that China is doing very poorly right now. I just saw some reports coming out, and I don't want that to happen to China. I like the president a lot, President Xi. I don't want it to happen. I was actually saddened to hear it, but they are getting absolutely hammered in China. And, they're sending boats, the biggest boats in the world, carrying cargo like nobody's ever seen before. These are the biggest boats in the world, biggest cargo ships in the world, and they're coming and they're turning around in the Pacific Ocean. They're doing a big U-turn and going back because they don't want the goods because 145% tariff. But at a certain point, I hope we're going to make a deal with China. We're talking to China, but their factories are closing all over China because we're not taking their product. We don't want their product unless they're going to be fair with us. And that includes intellectual property and other things.
And that's a big deal, too, the intellectual property question. President Trump yesterday talking about tariff and negotiations with China. Howard Lutnick, who's the Commerce Secretary at this 100-day cabinet meeting, speaking here a bit more on the effects, what's happened since some of these tariffs have been proposed and some have gone into effect. Howard Lutnick yesterday cut 8.
Investment accelerator, which gets to recruit these companies. And you've never seen anything like the companies committed to building in America. Technology companies have committed over $2.5 trillion to build in America based on your tariffs, right? Sovereign countries all backing, the whole Middle East and all these countries backing their sovereign wealth funds. They all want to invest in America, and they're coming in, again, over $3 trillion committed. So just those two topics, you're at $5.5 trillion. And then you've got the whole pharma industry knows it's got to come home because America pays for all the drugs of the world. So the pharmaceuticals have to come home, right? Autos coming home, industrials coming home. So, we've got to train, and your great Secretary of Labor together and the Secretary of Education together, we're going to train the workforce to build America. It's unbelievable.
That's Howard Lutnick, Commerce Secretary, yesterday at the 100 Days event. This portion of the Steve Gruber Show brought to you by the Wellness Company. At the Wellness Company, they believe your health is your greatest asset. From natural supplements to comprehensive medical consultations, they offer doctor-developed solutions designed to support your heart, immune system, and overall well-being. If you're ready to take charge of your health journey, join their membership program. Access to 24/7 virtual care from experts, exclusive discounts, and personalized health plans. TWC.health/Gruber. TWC.health/Gruber. Use the promo code Gruber.
Relief. Your America.
It's the Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on this Thursday morning. Steve back tomorrow, Friday, to take you into the weekend. Thanks so much for joining us. You can find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM, or scottbertram.com. The show at stevegruber.com and at Steve Gruber Show on X. If you're with us in hour two, Ed Tarnowski joins us. We'll talk about school choice. David Scarlett, his new film Battle at the Border, and Laura Dunn from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Every now and then you see a policy proposal or an idea and say that is a disaster waiting to happen. That is a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. You go back to the mortgage-backed securities and the financial crisis in the late aughts, '08 and '09, and you look back and say, well, that was completely predictable. What did you think was going to happen? We have a student loan crisis in the country. There are far too many people owing far too much for student loans. Now, the answer is not to wipe out that debt and say it doesn't exist anymore. The answer is probably not giving out money like that to students to spend $300,000 on a degree that might not earn them much money at all. Right? It's just not smart. But if you agree to take those loans, then you should agree to pay them back. That's how this thing works. In Illinois, the state treasurer of Illinois is trying a new program called Funding You Illinois. And the idea here is that you can get a loan. It does not take into account your credit score, and you don't need a co-signer. The treasurer of the state actually says it's an attractive option for students who have maxed out their financial aid, grants, and scholarship opportunities. Uh, so you have a program here designed to hand money over at interest rates of 8 to 10% to students, not looking at their credit score, meaning not looking at their ability to pay back the loan, and not demanding that the person taking the loan have a co-signer or someone who says, yes, I'll make sure this loan is paid back. This is one of those policies. This is a recipe for disaster. This is a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. Just handing out money to people to go to college without taking into account their ability to pay any of it back. Bad idea. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on The Steve Gruber Show. Live from the campus of Hillsdale College in beautiful Hillsdale, Michigan, this is Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on the Steve Gruber Show. It's Thursday, May 1st, 2025. Thanks so much for joining us, and here are three big things you need to know. One, a U.S. Senate effort to block President Trump's tariffs fell short on Wednesday. Senate Republicans largely united in their opposition. It was a 49-49 tie vote. All but three Republicans opposed the measure. Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island and Mitch McConnell of Kentucky did not vote on the matter. Two, Stellantis reporting a 14% drop in first quarter revenue. The automaker also suspending financial guidance for the rest of the year due to the uncertainty surrounding tariffs. The company's CFO says they are still absorbing some tariff adjustments announced on Tuesday that could provide some relief for the company. And number three, thank you. The Michigan House has passed a repeal of a 2023 law that removed local control over large scale solar and wind farm permitting, giving that authority to state utility regulators. The bill, though likely to stall in the state Senate, which is Democrat controlled. The Democrat led legislature a couple of years ago passed that legislation that shifted decision making on projects to the state through the Michigan Public Service Commission, local authorities with no input on solar and wind farm projects. That's where we start hour two of the Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on this Thursday morning. Thanks so much for being alongside. Here at Hillsdale College, classes ended yesterday. Final start tomorrow. Commencement next Saturday, I should say, with Victor Davis Hanson giving the commencement address. Always nice to have him here on campus. The academic year winds down, though. There are summer sessions, and students will be back before they even know it in August. This is a transition time for us here at the college. I, here at Hillsdale, am the general manager of the student radio station here, the award-winning WRFH. I'm a lecturer in journalism. I'm the director of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. So we have new student leaders for the radio station for next year that are now in place. And this week, I'm meeting with each of them individually to talk about plans, goals for next year, and also how they can plan for that over the summer. So doing some long-term planning this week for the student radio station here at Hillsdale College. You can find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM, or scottbertram.com, stevegruber.com, and at Steve Gruber Show on X. We'll talk this hour with Ed Tarnowski about school choice in just about 10 minutes. David Scarlett later on this hour, his film Battle at the Border, and then Laura Dunn from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, all coming up this hour on the program. Every now and then, come across someone that makes a point on X that is so great. It might be elsewhere too. In this particular case on X, that's so great and so marvelous and so wonderful. You just have to say, oh, yes, that's exactly right. I wish I said that. So I will give credit to this thought because it's something that has been sort of kicking around in my mind that this has now been crystallized in this exact argument. You are seeing now, last week, this week, you'll continue to see it for months to come, this effort by legacy media, mainstream media members trying to win back your trust. There are books coming out, articles being written about, man, we totally missed Joe Biden's diminished mental capacity. Don't know how it happened. We're real sorry about it, but you can trust us again to tell you the truth. Jake Tapper's got a book, and other people have books coming out about what happened the past 4 years, how the president was behind the scenes, and they're saying to you essentially, man, we don't know how we missed this. I don't know what happened. We didn't report on it. We should have, and let's move forward. And we're going to be better about this. You can trust us. And it rings so hollow because everyone with a working brain and a working set of eyes watched President Biden the past couple of years and knew what was happening. And if you called it out, if you noticed it, if you reported on it, you were pilloried in the media. And they'd write stories saying it's a lie. And they'd give you 4 Pinocchios. and they'd say these are cheap fakes, right? These videos, they're cheap fakes. They're trying to make the president look bad, which is why it rings so untrue. Journalists are supposed to be curious. Journalists are supposed to get to the bottom of stories. And what happened the past 4 years, or at least the last 3 years under President Biden, is that the country, everyone saw what was happening to the president. And the journalists said, no, you're wrong. It's a big lie. And they tried to explain away what was happening with President Biden. The RNC, Republican National Committee, would post these videos on X and say, look, this is the president today being wandering off. This is the president today needing help to get off a stage. This is the president today nearly falling over wearing these giant shoes, recall? And every time, media would say, no, that's a lie. The president's fine. They say he's fine. There's no problem. Joe Scarborough, this is the best and sharpest version of Joe Biden. And if you can't handle it, blank you. And now we know it was all a setup, a giant conspiracy to make the president look good. And so all these apologies ring hollow. This point is so good. This point is so good. At Political Math on X, a great account to follow, been a follower for years. I know his real name and it escapes my brain right now. I wrote an article in the American Spectator some years ago that he also had an article in. He's talking about a video from the White House Correspondents' Dinner last week in which Alex Thompson, I believe, is again apologizing, saying, man, we don't know how we missed this, but you can trust us in the future to get things right. This video makes my blood boil. Thompson says admitting mistakes rebuilds trust in the media. But the reason the press wants to rebuild its trust is so they can lie to you again the next time they need you to believe the lies. That is such a fantastic point. The media is not trying to make amends. They're not saying we're going to change our ways. They're not saying we're going to be better about things. What they're saying is, we're sorry, forgive us, so we can lie to you again. He says the admitting mistakes isn't something they are doing because they feel bad or are contrite. It's a manipulation tactic. They're admitting mistakes so they can build trust with you, so they can betray you and that trust the next time it is politically necessary. Motives matter here. Their motive is not to show the truth. It is to regain the currency of trust. It's not a motive of humility or respect for the truth, but of a desire to regain their lost power. That is a magnificent take by @PoliticalMath on X. The media is not sorry that they missed the story. The media is sorry that you don't trust them anymore because you could see better than they could. The supposed insiders, the people in the White House press briefing room, the people with access, the people who could talk to insiders and get comments off the record and anonymous quotes and perhaps build this case that the president's mental capabilities were in decline. They didn't do it. They didn't want to do it, and instead called you liars and said you like cheap fake videos of the president. They don't want to change. They want you to forgive them so they can lie to you again the next time it is politically necessary to do so. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. It's the Steve Gruber Show. It's the Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on this Thursday morning. When I fill in for Steve, we head back into the world of music history. Birthdays, death days, number ones on this day, other anniversaries. On this day back in 1956, Johnny Cash released his classic song, I Walk the Line. Long, long time ago at this point, he walked that line. 1956 is when that song was released. We're joined on the phone lines now and in person. Well, via video. Ed Tarnowski with us, Policy and Advocacy Director at EdChoice. That's edchoice.org. Also host of the State of Choice podcast and a Young Voices contributor. Ed, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on today. It's a pleasure.
Appreciate you being here. On the topic of educational choice, I have to begin by asking you about this comment by Justice Brown Jackson. I guess it was last week in oral arguments where uh, she essentially makes the case for school choice inadvertently. She wouldn't do it if she knew she was doing it. She said, if parents don't like this thing that's being taught in the classroom, they could choose a different school. Well, that's what most conservatives want to be able to say. She would not want that to be the policy across the board, I imagine. It was an odd argument for perhaps the most liberal justice on the court to make.
That's right. And I certainly wish that more people could understand that, yes, parents should have the choice to decide what school they can send their kids. And in so many places without school choice right now, that's not the case. If you're in a state that doesn't offer any ESA program or some kind of private school choice program, your only option is basically going to your local district school. And for many people, that school, it might be best for them. But in many other scenarios, if you have unique needs, it might not be the best fit. And you should have options to a different education system or educational setting that's best fit for your kids.
How many states now offer that option? I know Texas has been expanding, although if I heard correctly, North Dakota's governor vetoed a bill this past week that would have expanded school choice there. Where is school choice on the march in this country?
That's right. Well, there are now 16 states that offer programs with universal eligibility, and there are over 80 programs that offer choice at all. Those other ones are often more limited in scope and size. But yeah, 15 or 16 that now have universal eligibility. That's up from zero just 3.5, 4 years ago. So we've seen a massive shift. I'd argue the largest shift in education policy that we've seen in a generation in America.
What's the short argument for choice? Does it work? Does it give parents more options? Do we see better academic results when parents and families have the ability to choose where students attend school?
It certainly does. So, one of my favorite studies to cite is the impact that we've seen on choice on public school students who remained in public schools. There have actually been we've seen 33, 26 of the 29 studies conducted on the empirical studies that have conducted on the impact of private school choice programs on students who remained in public school actually shows positive effects for students who remain in public school. We also see positive effects on other student outcomes like educational attainment, likelihood to graduate from high school, attend college, or attain a college degree. We see parent satisfaction, overwhelming positive effects. So across the board, the data is on the side of choice. If you really are presenting it all honestly, you see that overwhelmingly the data shows that choice improves student outcomes and it improves competition among schools.
Ed Tarnowski with us, Policy and Advocacy Director at EdChoice, edchoice.org, host of the State of Choice podcast, Young Voices contributor. Ed, here in Michigan, we don't have the most robust school choice program, but we do have. I come from Illinois originally. It's far better than it was in Illinois. Something that we've been hearing about. The Detroit News did an investigation on class size across the state in various schools and saw that many schools had 30, 35 students in these younger grade classrooms. And that's led to a different discussion about more transparency. How can parents know more about sort of the academic success, maybe school class sizes in schools across our state? As the choice movement broadens across the country and more parents have the opportunity to make these choices, is there a need sort of hand in hand to give parents the tools they need to make those decisions? Should that be also a goal of those of us on the side of school choice?
Oh, absolutely. Once these programs are passed, implementation of those programs is just as important. Making sure that parents are aware of their options, that it's easy to access those options. And we're seeing entrepreneurs pop up all across the country to respond to that. We've seen different systems like kind of like an Amazon for school choice, where families can look at the options that they have in the state, how their funds can be spent on choice, and parent navigators that also you can look at to see how are the schools rated in different districts or different private schools. How are parents responding to how their kids are being treated there? So we're seeing all different types of entrepreneurial models pop up to answer this question, and it's certainly so important. The idea should be, at the end of the day, choice needs to be parent centric. It needs to be easy as possible and seamless for parents to access choice and use it. I'm excited to see where it goes, and we're seeing, like I said, a lot of entrepreneurship around this, and I think that's in the American spirit.
Got about 60 seconds left here, Ed. In states where we've seen more robust choice programs, what happens to spending? Do we see better results and higher spending, better results, same spending? What essentially happens in these states where we see increased choice?
Well, I can tell you, we did a study on this, and we saw that this was a couple of years ago, and we saw that we took the states that had the most robust choice for the longest amount of time, and we didn't see a decrease just for inflation. We didn't see a decrease in education funding in the state in any one of those states. There's often this talking point of, oh, it's going to siphon from the schools or this or that,
Mhm.
and we just haven't seen evidence of that happening. Where we're seeing choice happening, we're seeing financial support for the public schools increasing as well. In fact, many states are actually tying new choice programs to increases in teacher pay.
Ed Tarnowski is Policy and Advocacy Director at Ed Choice, host of the State of Choice podcast, and a Young Voices contributor. Ed, thanks so much for joining us this morning here on The Steve Gruber Show.
And thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Appreciate it. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. In about 5 minutes, David Scarlett will tell us about his film Battle at the Border and what's been happening at the border in the new Trump administration, Trump 2.0. Scott Bertram in for Steve. Steve Gruber Show. It's the Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on this Thursday morning. Thanks for being alongside. Thanks to Ed Tarnowski talking a bit of school choice with us. On the schools topic, as I've told you previously, read every day the Detroit News, and on Sundays get the Detroit Free Press. And I read the Sunday edition digitally sometimes, or at least the Saturday edition digitally sometimes. And this was in the Saturday digital, I think the Monday print edition of the Detroit News, an interview with John James, current congressman who's running for governor here in Michigan. And it was a Q&A format, Q&A interview format in this story. And the writer or an editor had edited the interview before publication. John James was responding to a question about schools and school funding and questions along those lines. And he had made a point or made the argument, said that around 5% of third grade students at Detroit public schools are proficient in reading. And the editor, someone thought it was necessary to put a little aside after that answer that said, note Actually, 11.7% of third grade students at Detroit public schools are proficient in reading, according to the latest test scores. And I was so relieved when I saw that, because at 5%, I thought there might have been a problem that third graders in Detroit public schools couldn't read. But now the editor's note saying it's actually 11%. Well, that's much better. We can rest easy at night knowing that 11% of third graders in Detroit public schools can read at a third grade level. They're proficient in reading. Back when it was 5, big problem. 11, no worries. I just thought it was odd that that was the point they thought they had to make clear. It's not 5, it's 11. So don't worry about it. They didn't say don't worry about it, but that was kind of the vibe, right? It was not 5%, it's 11% who can read. They're proficient at reading, so no worries. Is odd, I thought. Odd. This portion of the Steve Gruber Show brought to you by the Man in the Arena Tour. Attention business leaders and entrepreneurs. This is the first ever men's only event packed with the most elite voices in business, leadership, and global strategy, built to give you the edge to dominate in life and business right now. Join Garrett J. White, the unstoppable founder of Wake Up Warrior. He's taking the stage in the Man in the Arena Tour, your blueprint to lead and conquer. Seats are going fast. Don't get left behind. Lock in your ticket now at maninthearenatour.com. That's maninthearenatour.com. Step It's Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. Back on this day in 1976, Led Zeppelin's album Presence topped the charts for the first of 2 weeks. A very heavy Jimmy Page album. Robert Plant was still mourning the death of his young child. So a lot of heavy Page riffs on the Presence album from Led Zeppelin. Topped the charts on this day in 1976. Scott Bertram in for Steve on the Steve Gruber Show. Happy to be joined by David Scarlett now, a former U.S. Marine, author of All for His Glory, the near-death experience of a modern-day job, and also creator of the film Battle at the Border. David, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Scott, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
My pleasure to have you. Before we begin, or as we begin, tell people a little bit about Battle at the Border, where they can find it, and how did you get involved in something like this?
Well, they can get it at hisglory.tv. We have two sites. We have hisglory.me, which is our 24/7 programming, but hisglory.tv is where we have our documentaries, Battle at the Border. We've done 2 documentaries at the border, and we've done 3 with January 6th as well.
So this battle at the border continues with Donald Trump and Trump 2.0. The numbers are astounding. The reduction in arrests, the reduction of people who are even attempting to come across the border under President Donald Trump, which goes to show all along, Democrats said we need new bills, we need new this, we need new that. What we needed was someone who was going to enforce the law and actually make it a priority to close the border, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And what they were telling us was not the truth. And you can see that in our documentary, Battle at the Border. I spent a whole day with Sheriff Lamb and a whole day with Sheriff Daniels. We were down at the border for 7 days. And they purposely handcuffed our Border Patrol, the troopers in Arizona, the troopers in Texas. We did both borders. They weren't even allowed to communicate with each other. When I rode in the shotgun with Sheriff Lamb, he couldn't even communicate real time with Border Patrol or anyone else. They had to rig up a secondary system just to communicate. And this was all done on purpose.
What was the purpose? Why would there be edicts in place that prevented effective, not prosecution, but effective tactics at the border?
Well, it's the same reason why they paid these illegal immigrants to come in, more than people are getting on Social Security. Why NGOs now we find we actually documented an NGO, a Christian organization, which just breaks my heart. We're in the film. They're bragging about how they're taking money from the federal government and basically trafficking children and humans throughout the United States of America on the taxpayers' dime. So this was part of the plan that many didn't want to speak about for a long time. Now it's coming out. This was part of replacing our middle class and having a Democratic Party that would be unstoppable. And that was the purpose behind this whole this whole southern border and more.
David Scarlett with us. He's creator of the film Battle at the Border. You can find it at hisglory.tv. This was such a central issue to the Trump campaign. It's an issue that a majority of Americans agree with Donald Trump on, still do according to polling. Why does the battle at the border and the fight over our border resonate so deeply with voters across the country?
Well, many things, because this is not just a border state issue. This is all 50 states. Every single person watching this today has been impacted either directly or indirectly with friends or family with fentanyl. That fentanyl is coming through our southern border. It's coming through our northern border. It's coming from China. It's coming through cartel that do not want us care for our country. So the fentanyl is one. The other is the trafficking of people coming in, rapists like President Trump is dealing with, and Tom Homan, the worst of the worst. And people think that these are just, everyday people that want to come into America for a new life. But that's not what we saw. There are some of those, but 60% of the kids that we saw coming across the border did not match up with the adults that were coming across. And that was done deliberately by Joe Biden as soon as he took office, is take the DNA mechanism away so that you could identify, do these kids really belong to this set of adults? And again, 60% didn't. What you saw with the cartel in this documentary just breaks your heart. They drugged up these poor kids so bad that they were lifeless just to get them across the border so that they wouldn't make noises to be heard. If that doesn't break your heart, I don't know what does. And I do not believe for a second that the average American person, even though they support President Trump right now, know how bad it truly was and still is in some cases.
I want to go back to something you mentioned. I just saw that this week, and if the news came out previously, I had missed it. But this the ceasing of DNA testing on children coming across the border to see if they match with the adult they are with. Joe Biden, the Biden administration stopped that from happening, and so there was no
Right.
effort to make sure that children belonged to the adult they were coming across the border with. A, talk about the ramifications of that, and B, has that been reversed now under President Trump?
I'm told through Tom Homan that that has been reversed, as President Trump says. The reduction at the border is absolutely massive. Their still cartel are very creative. They're still finding ways to get into the country, but we are making it more difficult. But there's no reason why to take that DNA away, other than you wanted these kids to come into the United States. It's absolutely wicked what our country has done. I think it was Tom Homan that came out and said the United States of America, this was in Congress, the United States of America under Joe Biden was the largest human trafficking in the world. And people took a deep breath when they heard that, but he was absolutely right. And that was all of this was planned for a particular reason. And that was getting a new voter, a voter group in the United States affect many things, not just a permanent Democratic Party, but it affects electoral elections, Congress people that you get per state. It had huge, huge ramifications.
David Scarlett with us, creator of the film Battle at the Border, a former U.S. Marine as well. Find that film at hisglory.tv. Step one is reinforcing the border and stopping that flow. Step two, of course, is deportation of illegal immigrants who are here inside the country. How would you judge the effectiveness, I should say, of President Trump on that step two thus far?
I think he's doing a good job of shutting the border down, but we have too many cells in the United States, military age men, which we caught on camera coming in the United States that didn't have any kids or any women with them. We know that through FBI and other intel sources that the top 40 cities have cells of Hamas and Hezbollah waiting for to be triggered by the Ayatollah. So we have to go out and get those really, really bad cells out. I'm told we know where they're at, and we need to go out and clean them out. And I'm hoping Tom Homan and Pete Hegseth behind the scenes are bringing in special forces to do just that, because it's a ticking time bomb if we don't get the worst of the worst out of this country.
David Scarlett, former U.S. Marine, author of All for His Glory, and creator of the film Battle at the Border. You can find Battle at the Border at hisglory.tv. David, thanks so much for joining us here on The Steve Gruber Show.
Thank you for having me. Blessings.
Appreciate the time this morning. This portion of the show brought to you by Great Lakes Pet Food. If you're looking for high-quality pet food made in America, you need to try Great Lakes Pet Food. Made with the highest quality pork and chicken, Great Lakes Pet Food is the dog food that Steve uses for his herd of canines. Michigan-made Great Lakes Pet Food. More at GreatLakesPetFood.com. That's GreatLakesPetFood.com. This is The Steve Gruber Show. Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram for Steve. Celebrating a birthday today, country star Tim McGraw. I don't have a ton of love for more modern country sounds. Heard Johnny Cash earlier, that was fun. But this song, Diamond Rings and Old Bar Stools from Tim McGraw, must be about a decade
She's on
old at
hold
this
now.
point. It's a good one. Tim McGraw has had a ton of hits too. Live Like You Were Dying. He turns 58 years old today. Happy birthday to him. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. Here on the Steve Gruber Show, thanks so much for joining us on this Thursday morning. Laura Dunn is with us now, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration Highway Safety Specialist joins us. And good morning to you, Laura.
Hey, good morning, Scott.
Thanks so much for joining us this morning, talking about National Heat Stroke Prevention Day. We are not into summer as of yet here in southern Michigan. We're still in the 60s, but summer is coming quickly, and even temps in the 60s, I would imagine, can be dangerous. What do parents need to know about National Heat Stroke Prevention Day?
They can be. So as the days get warmer, we're reminding everybody about the dangers that hot cars pose to children, especially working to reach families with children that are, newborns to 5 years old. Those kids are most susceptible to heat stroke. We want to talk to parents about, before you leave your car, make sure to stop, look in the back seat for your child, and then lock it up.
There are three major scenarios in which these heat stroke deaths usually happen, and the majority are forgotten cases. A child is mistakenly, unknowingly left behind in a hot car. There are parents out there, I can hear them saying, how can that possibly be? How could a parent ever forget a child in a car? But it does happen. What are some ways that we can implement to prevent that from happening?
It does happen. One of the biggest risk factors here is a change in routine for parents.
Mm-hmm.
So people are dropping their kids off at childcare that don't normally do so, or they have a doctor's appointment that morning. Something is different. And that kind of causes parents to kind of switch into that, what we would call like autopilot mode, right? You're going about your day, you're going to work as you normally do, and that's something that happens. So one thing that parents can do to help prevent this is arrange with their child care provider to have that child care provider give them a call if their child doesn't arrive within 10 minutes of when they're normally supposed to be there. Another thing that parents can do is make sure things that you need for the day are in your back seat, your work bag, your badge, your phone. Things that you're going to need throughout your day are physically in the back seat, so that forces parents to open that back seat and do that visual check.
And about a quarter of these hot car deaths are due to gained access. So children who get into a car on their own, unlock doors, and then for whatever reason can't get out. What can we do to prevent those types of deaths?
Absolutely. So in those scenarios, sometimes kids are playing game, hide and seek, or, they just love being in the car and they want to pretend to drive, things that kids do. So something that parents and really anybody can do is that when you leave your car, make sure to lock your car, even if it's in your driveway, even if you don't have kids. So neighbor kids couldn't access your car and get in there. You should talk to kids about that the car is never a safe place to play. You shouldn't be in the car if nobody else is there. And really encourage parents to store their keys, their key fobs, anything they need to access that vehicle up and out of reach of kids.
And talking this morning with Laura Dunn for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration about heat stroke prevention for children. Left behinds are the remainder of those cases when a child knowingly is left in a vehicle. I'm going to leave you in the car. I got to run into the store, grab something very quickly. And boy, I can just imagine a scenario where I think I'm only going to be 2 minutes and you get in the line and a cash register malfunctions and you can't get out when you think you're getting it out. All of a sudden
Yes.
It's 10, 15 minutes later. All right, what do we do with these situations? Is there ever a time when it's okay to leave a child alone in a car like this?
No, our message is no amount of time is safe. Please never leave your child in a car. And partially the reason for that is the inside of a car can heat up very quickly. In about 10 minutes, the inside of your car, the temperature increases by about 20 degrees. It's a greenhouse effect, and it just keeps getting hotter and hotter and hotter inside the car. And children are much less able to regulate their thermoregulatory system, their temperature control. So they're much, much more susceptible to heat stroke. And it's a small amount of time where things can really become dangerous for kids. So even if you're parked in the shade, even if your window is cracked, none of that is a safe scenario for kids. So either skip the errand for now or take your kids with you. Please don't leave them in the car.
I had someone, I don't know if someone told me or I read this back when I was a new parent. They said, imagine your child is a bag filled with $1 million. Is there ever a scenario you would leave a bag with $1 million in the car? No,
Right.
no, never.
Exactly.
There's never really a scenario in which you'd want to
Exactly.
leave your kid alone in the car for any length of time whatsoever. They are both extremely valuable, so treat them that way, right?
Exactly.
nhtsa.gov/heatstroke is the website. nhtsa.gov/heatstroke. Laura, we got about 30 seconds. Anything else parents should know?
I would say if you ever see a child in a vehicle in distress, act immediately. Call 911, get that child help. Every minute counts to make all the difference for that child, and never leave your kids alone in a car.
Laura Dunn, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration Highway Safety specialist on heat stroke prevention. The campaign, nhtsa.gov/heatstroke. Laura, thank you so much for joining us this morning on the Steve Gruber Show.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it. nhtsa.gov/heatstroke is the website. We'll check sports with Brock in a moment. Hour 3 brings Ingrid Jacks from USA Today and Alexandra DeSanctis from the Ethics and Public Policy Center as well. Scott Bertram in for Steve on the Steve Gruber Show. It's the Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on this Thursday morning. He's back tomorrow. Brock is here right now with a check of sports.
With a look at sports, I'm Brock Palmbush. In the NBA playoffs last night, a pair of Game 5s in round one. Houston beat Golden State 131-116 in Houston to stay alive in their series. Warriors still lead the series 3-2, and Minnesota eliminated the Los Angeles Lakers with a 103-96 victory in LA. Timberwolves take the series 4-1. In the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs, 3 Game 5s in round one. Washington knocked out Montreal 4-1 to take that series 4-1. Florida took out Tampa Bay with a 6-3 win in Tampa. Panthers win the series 4-1, and Winnipeg took a 3-2 series lead on St. Louis with a 5-3 victory at home over the Blues. In Major League Baseball, a full schedule of games. American League winners included Baltimore, Detroit, and Seattle. National League winners included Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Arizona. That's a look at sports. Back to you, Scott.
Thank you, Brock. Appreciate it. This portion of the Steve Gruber Show brought to you by My Pure Health Solutions. Are you ready to improve your health and your well-being? Are you ready to take control of your life and lose that weight? Just feel better. Time to contact My Pure Health Solutions. My Pure Health Solutions has helped thousands of people shed the pounds and the problems that go along with being too heavy for too long. My Pure Health builds a custom plan just for you. Not a one-size-fits-all, but a one size that fits you. If you're ready to look in the mirror again and feel good about yourself, then it's time to take a closer look at My Pure Health Solutions. Go to gruberhealth.com right now. Schedule your free consultation, gruberhealth.com, for your chance to feel better. That's gruberhealth.com for My Pure Health Solutions. Our 3 Ingrid Jacks, as I mentioned, from USA Today, and Alexandra DeSanctis from the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Story this morning in the Detroit News. I won't get a chance to cover it next hour. I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing yet. Craig Mauger with a report. The Michigan campaign finance website hasn't been working properly for weeks. A consultant told him, you can pretty much get away with anything and not face public criticism because the public can't see what you filed. Mauger says the situation now looms over Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson's campaign for governor. She vowed to campaign on transparency and efficiency, and a non-functioning website is neither of those things. Scott Bertram in for Steve on The Steve Gruber Show. Live from the campus of Hillsdale College in beautiful Hillsdale, Michigan. This is Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on The Steve Gruber Show. It's Thursday, May 1st, 2025. Welcome to it. Here are three big things you need to know. One, House Republicans are advancing legislation supporting President Trump's immigration policies. The House Judiciary Committee approved a measure along party lines yesterday that would fund the deportation of 1 million migrants each year. The bill also includes $45 billion to detain 100,000 migrants. Two, President Trump defending his record on the economy and his poll numbers at a News Nation town hall. President Trump called into the town hall event hosted by Chris Cuomo yesterday, also featured Stephen A. Smith. He said the recent polling on his approval rating were fake polls where more Democrats were interviewed than Republicans. Shrugging off concerns about the economy, Trump says he knows what he's doing. And number three, Michigan House Speaker Matt Hall crediting Governor Gretchen Whitmer making an appearance at the White House with helping Selfridge Air National Guard Base get new fighter jets. Hall says the Democratic governor has embraced Republican President Donald Trump this term, says she's doing a lot of great things to help Michigan residents. Whitmer has said since Trump won that she'd work to find common ground wherever she could with the new president. That's where we start hour three of the Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm here at Hillsdale College. Last day of classes yesterday. Final start tomorrow. Commencement next Saturday. Victor Davis Hanson, our commencement speaker this year here at Hillsdale. I'm here where I serve as general manager of the student radio station, the award-winning WRFH, three-time back-to-back-to-back Michigan College Audio Station of the Year award winner. Also, a lecturer in journalism and director of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. Find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM. Also, scottbertram.com, where I try to corral all my media doings. And also the show at stevegruber.com and at Steve Gruber Show on X. This hour, Ingrid Jacks joins us from the USA Today, where she's a columnist, and also Alexandra DeSanctis, too, from the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Following up on that Gretchen Whitmer story, Politico has a story today. I don't know, considering she covered her face with a folder at the Oval Office, I don't know if she wants stories like this or doesn't want stories like this. It's hard to tell. Of the potential 2028 Democratic presidential contenders, no one has placed a bigger bet than Gretchen Whitmer that a conciliatory approach to President Donald Trump could pay off. On Tuesday in Michigan, it appeared to do just that. Trump announced a new F-15 fighter mission at Selfridge Air National Guard Base. Whitmer's office said it would generate some $850 million in economic impacts for her state. Exactly what she visited the Oval Office for earlier this month in a move that was blasted by critics on the left and resulted in Whitmer shielding her face with a folder. This time, though, she was not hiding her face. Instead stepped on stage with Donald Trump to take a victory bow in what she described to Politico Tuesday as a BFD for my state. BFD, if you recall what Joe Biden said about the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare. BFD. It's a BFD for our state. On stage, Whitmer didn't address Trump by name. She also didn't address him by name with some X posts yesterday. As with the awkward Oval Office visit, Whitmer told the audience in Michigan she hadn't planned to speak on Tuesday, but she said she was damn happy she was there. Later, she told Politico she had learned from her mistake from her last meeting with the president. Quote, I wouldn't have put that folder in front of my face because that gave people fodder, Whitmer said. All the grief, this shows you why you put the people first. They see it and it pays off. This announcement is such an important thing for Michigan and our economy. It's true that of all the potential 2028 candidates thus far, Gretchen Whitmer has probably made the biggest bet on being semi-friendly, conciliatory with President Trump and the Trump administration, saying she'll work where there are things that they can do together, things they can do together to help the state of Michigan. This is one of those things. I don't know if it's a strategy, merely strategy for a 2028 run, or if she truly does believe that it's just simply the best way to get things done for the state of Michigan and the people of Michigan because she might not run in 2028. I think there was a story a few weeks ago saying that it was less likely than likely that she would. It's far away, and the governor has responsibilities here at home. And a politician who only does things because it could benefit her constituents, that's kind of unusual position too. We'll see how that moves forward. Her tactics are in direct opposition to another potential candidate for 2028, and that's Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. We spent a lot of time back in hour one talking about J.B. Pritzker and his increasingly heated rhetoric, comparing the Trump administration to a Nazi regime, comparing people who voted for Donald Trump to people who supported the Nazi regime in Germany, did so in his budget address a couple of months ago. And the past week or so has made a lot of news, called for mass protests, called no peace for Republicans earlier this week. I want to play two cuts here. I think I can fit them both in. One is from a couple of weeks ago. It kind of went under the radar, but it fits this pattern of rhetoric coming from J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, potential 2028 presidential candidate. Pritzker explaining here that Donald Trump is the kind of guy that just might need a punch in the face. This is cut 5.
Bending to the whims of a bully will not end his cruelty. It will only embolden him. The response to authoritarianism isn't acquiescence. Bullies respond to one thing, and one thing only: a punch in the face.
There you go, a punch in the face. Just Tuesday night on a governor town hall with Midas Touch, a left-wing media content organization, J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, now calling on people who oppose the Trump administration to start showing up at congressional offices, Republican offices in their state and in Washington, D.C. This is J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois, cut 11.
And that, in fact, is one of the things I want to say to everybody that's listening. If you're not out there protesting in front of a Republican congressman's office or out in the street making your voice heard, or calling your friends in another state to have them do it, or showing up in Washington, D.C. in front of their offices, those Republican congressmen, then you're not doing what's necessary to put pressure on them to vote the right way.
All right, J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois, again, likely 2028 presidential candidate, saying over the past couple of weeks, Republicans should know no moment of peace, that people like Donald Trump need to be punched in the face. There you hear him say that people, protesters, Democrats, should go to offices. And again, not let Republicans know a moment of peace. If this were a Republican saying things like this, there'd be primetime specials on CNN. What's wrong with this guy? Why is he practicing this reckless rhetoric? Is he trying to incite some violence against the opposing party? Why is he so overheated in his rhetoric? Instead, he's a Democrat billionaire, governor of Illinois, and perhaps a favorite, one of the favorites to be the presidential nominee in 2028. So no one's going to lay a glove on him. But we should be aware of the kind of stuff he's saying, because who knows what J.B. Pritzker will say next week about people who support Donald Trump and about Donald Trump himself. More next on The Steve Gruber Show. It's Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertrand sitting in for Steve, wishing a happy birthday today to Ray Parker Jr. of the band Radio in the late 70s, RAYDIO, and then solo success with Ghostbusters, the theme from that film. Some lawsuits involved there because he may have lifted that bass line a bit from Huey Lewis in the News and I Want a New Drug. Some money exchanged hands. Long story there. Don't have time to get into it. Happy birthday, Ray Parker. Ghostbusters fame. Ray Parker is 71 years old today. Joined on the phone lines now by Ingrid Jack. She's a columnist for USA Today. You can find her work at usatoday.com. Ingrid, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Your column this week, 77 million Americans voted for Trump after 100 days. Few of them regret it. I think that's a surprise to many in the mainstream legacy media. Does it surprise you that so many Trump supporters continue to support Trump?
No, it really doesn't. And I just thought, I looked at this one particular poll, University of Massachusetts, YouGov poll, that showed only 2% of voters who supported Trump in November would change their mind now or regretted that decision. Just 2%. And we've seen a lot, right, in the last 100 days. So I think people would know if they're displeased with what they're seeing. And it seems like they're still confident in their decision. And I think that's a more important number than the daily approval ratings that go up and down pretty dramatically. But if you're saying you would still support this candidate again, I think that's the most telling.
I think for those who might be surprised by that number, one of the reasons is tariffs and the markets and all the confusion and uncertainty about tariffs. But if there's one thing that we knew about Donald Trump, it's that this man loves tariffs. He always has, going back decades. He loved them in his first term. He talked about using them in his second term. Again, if you voted for Donald Trump and paid any attention to him on the campaign trail, you knew that this was a policy that was coming. So you shouldn't be surprised.
No, you shouldn't be surprised. Trump, to his credit, he came to Detroit about a month before the election, and he told a group of business leaders, "I'm going to impose big, beautiful tariffs," and and that's what he's done. And Scott, I'm a very much a free market person. I'm very libertarian when it comes to the markets. So I am not a fan of tariffs, but you have to look at the whole picture when you're voting for someone. And I think there's no way a conservative could have ever considered supporting Kamala Harris or Biden if he had stayed in the race. So I think Trump, a lot of other things he's promised could go a long ways to help the economy, including getting these tax cuts renewed, passed, reducing regulations. Those things are great. And I hope that Trump keeps rolling back the tariffs. He announced some relief for automakers ahead of coming to Michigan to mark his 100th day. So I hope maybe he's realizing that as much as he loves tariffs, the economy doesn't. And perhaps he should rethink some of those.
Ingrid Jack's with us, USA Today columnist. Find her at usatoday.com. Follow her on X as well. Her column this week on Trump's 100 days in office. If people still support the president, do they still support his party? This will be one of the major questions coming for the midterms a year and a half or so from now. Is there any chance, do you think, that you would see a split in which people say, I still love the president, I'm not sure I like the rest of the party?
That is definitely the key question. And there's definitely very important elections coming up in Michigan in the midterms. There's a U.S. Senate seat up for grabs. We'll be electing a new governor. So I think the Republican Party, especially Republicans here in Michigan, are very eager to know the answer to that question. And I think their chances are very tied to the success of President Trump. So I think that's also a reason why Trump should really take a close look at the economic consequences with these tariffs. And if things continue to go poorly with the economy in the short term, that could really, I think, throw a wrench in some of these Republican races in a couple of years. So um, I do hope he gives a second thought to that. But Trump in the past has been very strong on campaigning for at least the Republicans he supports. So I'm sure he'll continue to be involved in the coming years.
Ingrid, if the economy has been somewhat shaky, thanks in part to reaction to tariffs, planned or otherwise, the
Right.
border has gone very well. You look at the raw numbers in terms
Yes.
of arrests and the people who aren't coming across the border anymore. This was an important, perhaps the most important topic for people who made that decision back in November of 2024.
Yes.
If that border battle continues to be a success, is that enough to carry Trump through some other potholes along the way?
Well, I think that's an excellent point, and that was one of the top two issues, right, in the election. It was the economy and the border, and Trump, in just a matter of weeks, really he did secure the border. It just was shocking how quickly he was able to do that, and it showed how horribly the Biden administration failed to secure our country and the border. I think where the Trump administration could face some potholes is if they continue to ignore the courts on some of these deportations. I think they have to be careful there that even if they have the approval of the majority of the country to make sure the country's safe and that we know who exactly is here, I think
Mhm.
it's still important to follow the process.
Ingrid Jacks, columnist for USA Today, formerly with the Detroit News as well, might be a familiar name and voice. You can read her now at usatoday.com and also follow her on X. Ingrid, thanks so much for joining us this morning on The Steve Gruber Show.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Appreciate it. Read her stuff at usatoday.com. More next on The Steve Gruber Show.
Scleroderma makes
It's the Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on this Thursday morning. Steve is back with you on Friday. He'll take you into the weekend. This portion of the Steve Gruber Show brought to you by 1775 Coffee. Some coffee's weak, some coffee is cheap. 1775 coffee is neither. Hand-picked, 85 plus cupping score, roasted to bold perfection. It's coffee for the strong. Dark roast hits like a freight train. Medium roast, smooth but powerful. Even a vitality mushroom blend to sharpen your focus. Go to 1775coffee.com/Gruber. Use the promo code Gruber for 10% off. Every dollar you spend enters you to win a Tesla Cybertruck and $30,000. 1775 Coffee. Bold, strong, no BS. At 1775coffee.com/Gruber. A Democratic lawmaker here in Michigan has been punished after pulling a prank on a Republican colleague who she said had parked in her parking spot. State Rep Julie Brixey's floor speaking privileges were revoked. Her parking spot moved after she was caught on camera covering her colleague's car in plastic wrap. Republican official telling NBC News the penalties would remain in place for the foreseeable future. The incident happened back in mid-April. State Rep Matt Maddock arrived to go to work at the Capitol, apparently, parked his car across two spots, one of which was Brixey's. Video later released by House Republicans showing Brixey wrapping the car in plastic wrap. She told the Detroit News, "My colleague parked in two spots, including mine. To make sure no one hit his fancy car, I saran wrapped it to give it an extra layer of protection. Then went to the floor and said, I came in from the parking ramp. There's a black BMW with a vanity license plate. Your hood is open, your lights are on, your engine is running. Thank you." Those penalties mean that she can't deliver official addresses or remarks on the House floor for the time being, and she has to park much farther away. Maddock, for his part, said, "I can forgive her for pranking my car, but she really should be sorry for her awful votes that have been ruining Michigan." Punishment handed down in the saran wrap case. This is what our lawmakers are up to, at least on the Democratic side. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. This is the Steve Gruber Show. It's the Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. Thanks for being with us. On this day back in 1976, the Bellamy Brothers went to the top of the charts on the singles side with Let Your Love Flow, the group's only U.S. #1 hit. The Bellamy Brothers, #1 on this day back in 1976 with Let Your Love Flow. Scott Bertram in for Steve. He's back tomorrow. We're joined on the phone lines now by Alexandra DeSanctis, a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, EPPC.org. For more, Alexandra, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Appreciate you being alongside one of the great writers on the pro-life movement that you can find. Great book a couple of years ago as well. You wrote at National Review, but also this information at the Ethics and Public Policy Center about a new research, a new paper, chemical abortion far more dangerous to women than the FDA admits. Now, it's always dangerous because it always results in at least one victim. That would be the unborn child. But the research, the paper that your colleague Ryan Anderson did, shows there is more danger than we perhaps knew to the woman as well. What do we find out from this paper, Alexandra?
Well, what we found in the research by studying this all-payer claims database is that unfortunately, chemical abortion is about 22 times more dangerous than the FDA discloses on the drug label. So the FDA says 0.5% of women might experience serious adverse events. In fact, studying this data, about 10.93%, so close to 11% of women actually ended up experiencing serious adverse events. So this is things like sepsis, infection, hemorrhaging, trip to the emergency room for these conditions, or even more serious problems.
So, how is the data that you guys found, Ethics and Public Policy Center, and that research, how is it so different from what the FDA claims?
So there are a couple of things here. One is that the database, the data we're relying on is far larger. This surveys more than 865,000 prescriptions of chemical abortion between the years of 2017 and 2023. This is more than 20 or about 28 times as many chemical abortions as the FDA cited clinical trials included. So it's just a far greater number, and it's much more recent as well.
The drugs we're talking about here, mifepristone and misoprostol, I might be pronouncing that second one incorrectly, but we've heard these in the news. These are the drugs that people want to make available, or perhaps are available, via mail. Send them to your house, get them in the mail, do this at home. And what the research says, the study says, is 12% of women are going to face some sort of side effect. Is that about right?
That's right, and you are right that these drugs are available via mail. This has been a big change, first under the Obama administration, and then much more aggressively under the Biden administration. The FDA has loosened its safety restrictions around this drug. So it used to be the case that women had to see a doctor in person. They actually had to take the pill in person for a time, and the reason for that being there's all kinds of things you have to do to make sure that this is safe for the woman. Obviously, as you pointed out, it's not safe for the child, but say a woman has an ectopic pregnancy that she's unaware of, or if her pregnancy is further along than she realizes, if she's just seeing someone via telemedicine, it's impossible to figure out any of this information. And there's serious risks. The idea is a doctor needs to be able to kind of be with a woman as part of this care this procedure, rather, not care, to give her follow-up care if needed, if she experiences serious side effects. And that link is broken now because there's no safety regulations anymore, and you can just have telemedicine appointment and receive this drug via mail and take it at home by yourself.
Alexandra DeSanctis with us, fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, EPPC.org. You can find post and research from this paper there. What are the chances that the FDA looks at this data and perhaps reevaluates its official number and the description of side effects for these drugs?
I do think there's openness to it. There was a news story quite recently. The FDA head said that if data had changed, they had data they were relying on, but if there was any indication of new data about the safety of this drug, they'd be open to looking at that data. So I think they really have a responsibility to do so, to take this new research seriously, and this can be replicated, right? The data is available. People can get it if they want it. The FDA already has. The government has a lot of this data already available in its databases. Replicate the research, and I think they'll find the same sad results, and they have a real responsibility to at least reinstate those regulations, and if not, pull the drug from the market.
There was a recent U.S. Supreme Court case involving access to mifepristone, and someone asking you to read tea leaves, I suppose. If this kind of data were available for the justices, or if the FDA decided to change its official language regarding side effects, would that have made some kind of difference in the case? What I'm saying is, I forget the core issue of that particular Supreme Court case. Would the fact that mifepristone is more dangerous to the woman have made a difference in that particular case?
I don't think so. My understanding of that case is that it ended up coming down to a matter of standing and whether the individuals or the group suing the government over the approval of the mifepristone in the first place had standing to sue over that. So I'm not sure it would have made a difference there, but I do think in future cases, demonstrating whether or not the data is safe, or rather the drug is safe for women, this makes a difference because the FDA approved this based on data that appears to have, not really told the full story about the risks to women.
And this also goes to a core point about messaging on the topic of abortion. Those on the left, Planned Parenthood, and others have a stake in making sure, or trying to convince women that it's not a big deal, there are no side effects, it's safe, it's legal, it's not rare anymore. It's that word "rare" is gone from that particular description. And so the possibility that this drug, which can be shipped to you in the mail, actually is, what's the number, 22 times higher than the official FDA number of side effects, women who experience side effects. That particular piece of data, if it is disseminated correctly, undercuts the idea that this is safe for women.
No, absolutely. And I think a huge part of informed consent, which is a central principle of good medicine, is that you have to know what you're signing up for. And so women are going into this, using this drug with a very different sense of the risks to them, just because that's what the FDA is relying on. And this data suggests women don't know what they're signing up for. Even before we had this data, we knew this was more dangerous to women because of all the, there's many stories of these procedures going wrong and women needing follow-up care. And but this data really confirms women don't know what they're getting into. And particularly with the loosening of safety regulations already, women are at greater risk than they know.
What's the next step, or is there a next step for pro-life advocates now that we have this data from the EPPC?
I think the main thing to do here is to contact the FDA and urge them to pull the pill from the market, to reconsider the data, to dig into the database here, figure out how dangerous this really is to women, and either reinstate safety regulations or ideally pull the pill entirely.
Alexandra DeSanctis is a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, eppc.org. You can find a post regarding all this information and the actual data they pulled. Ryan Anderson, a co-author on the study. And you can read Alexandra's piece over at nationalreview.com. Chemical abortion far more dangerous to women than FDA admits, research shows. Alexandra, very nice to talk to you once again, and best of luck with all this.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Appreciate it. That's Alexandra DeSanctis, again, eppc.org for more info, and her piece too over at nationalreview.com. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. This is The Steve Gruber Show. It's the Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. On this day in 2023, Gordon Lightfoot passed away at the age of 84 years old. We hear Sundown behind us here. If You Could Read My Mind, so many great Gordon Lightfoot songs. I know a bit more about Gordon Lightfoot than the average bear because Gordon Lightfoot, toward the end of his, well, I guess not even toward the end of his life, but toward the end of his performing career, would frequently make Rockford a stop on his tour. And so we had tickets to give away for Gordon Lightfoot concerts. So we dig through and ask some Gordon Lightfoot trivia, the great Canadian singer-songwriter. It was kind of fun. Gordon Lightfoot died on this day in 2023. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve here on the Steve Gruber Show. Going to hear a little bit more from that cabinet meeting yesterday on 100 days of the second Trump administration. First, I want to go back. Kamala Harris talked last night, her first major speech since losing the election. No one really wanted to hear from her. She came back anyway. There's a cut. We're not going to play it, but you can find it's a great classic Kamala Harris word salad trying to describe the Trump administration that makes no sense whatsoever. But speaking of making no sense whatsoever, her vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz, who hasn't shut up since Election Day, going on these tours, talking about Trump, talking about this and that, and talking down Tesla. And he's so happy when Tesla stock goes down. Oops, Tesla stock is inside the pension funds that Minnesota has, the state of Minnesota. He's talking down his own pension funds in Minnesota. Anyway, Tim Walz yesterday speaking about why he was chosen to be the vice presidential nominee on the Democratic ticket. Listen early to this one, and then listen late to the last thing that Tim Walz says here. This is Minnesota governor, who I guess does do some gubernatorial duties at some point during the course of his day. Tim Walz, cut 10.
Look, my job was to do it. Look, I knew I was on the ticket. I would argue because we did a lot of amazing progressive things in Minnesota that improved people's lives. But I also was on the ticket, quite honestly, because I could code talk to white guys watching football, fixing their truck, doing that I could put them at ease. I was the permission structure to say, look, you can do this and vote for this. And you look across those swing states, with the exception of Minnesota, we didn't get enough of those votes.
But you could be giving them permission on TV every day. You could have been messaging that way, and that isn't necessarily how it shook out.
Well, yes, but I also said I understand myself. I said I think I'll give you pretty good stuff, but I'll also give you 10% problematic. And so somebody's got to make the decision here to handle some of this stuff and to make it. And those are just decisions that were made. And I think after the fact, it is not second guessing or anything. I think it's fair to go back on and look at this. Look, we had the most qualified person who'd run for president in this country's history at the top of the ticket.
Do you hear that? The most qualified person in the country's history at the top of the ticket. He's actually referring to Kamala Harris there, calling her the most qualified candidate in the country's history. And then earlier, as you heard, Tim Walz says, hey, it was my job to appeal to white dudes who love football and fixing their truck, and I gave them permission to vote for Kamala Harris, and then admits he failed at the job. So we didn't get enough of those votes in swing states across the country. So I guess, good job, Tim? You didn't do the job you were expected to do when you were put on the ticket, but you're still talking about stuff? He thinks he's still a player on the scene for a potential 2028 nomination, I think. I am not sure he's going to be a major factor, but we shall see. 100 days yesterday, the Trump administration had a cabinet meeting in which they recapped success on the border, success in the economy, and elsewhere. I wanted to highlight this piece from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth yesterday at this meeting. Pete Hegseth talking about recruiting in the military under the new Trump administration. This is cut 9.
Like so many things, Mr. President, you inherited a demoralized military that couldn't recruit, that was perceived as weak after what happened in Afghanistan and elsewhere because of Joe Biden. And what we have seen since your election and the inauguration has been nothing short of a recruiting renaissance. Decades, it hasn't been decades since we've seen this kind of recruiting in the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force. The men and women of America want to join the United States military led by President Donald Trump.
It's actually an somewhat underreported thing, and it's an important thing. military recruiting, and I've had a couple of conversations about this. Since Donald Trump took office, we've seen numbers really head in the right direction. More people want to fight for the country, want to enlist. That's a big deal. Uh, Howard Lutnick yesterday, the Commerce Secretary, also talking about the trillions of dollars in investments that have been pledged here in the United States by companies around the world, too. So a little celebration yesterday of 100 days. Also, Elon Musk was there in the background, not around the table, wearing two hats. He said, people say I wear multiple hats. So he literally wore multiple hats. Speaking of Doge and cost cutting, there's um, the Institute of Museum and Library Services is a federal agency that Trump and Doge has cut back on. And the thing about it is, it's not a giant grant funding organization, but they gave to a lot of places. So, like every community library and all these places, little museums got some money from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And so, the consequence of cutting that is that you have all these stories in local communities about how, oh, we're not going to get $12,000 anymore and we can't do X or we can't do Y. Earlier this week in the Chicago Tribune, there were two separate stories about how small libraries weren't getting funds from these grants anymore. One of them had to do with essentially content sharing among libraries in Illinois. So I need something, it's not at my local library, but the library 50 miles away has it, and then that library can get it trucked to the local location, and you can borrow it that way. It's a nice program. I know when I was young, I used that to the full extent. I wanted to find something, they didn't have it here, they had it brought in from a different library. That's great. It's a fun program. It's a fine program. The question remains, why should the federal government pick up the tab for, say, Illinois libraries or any state's libraries to lend books and materials between locations? Why is the federal government and the federal taxpayer the one who should pay for that via grants? That's the core question here. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve on The Steve Gruber Show. It's the Steve Gruber Show. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. Steve's back tomorrow on Friday to take you into the weekend. Thanks so much for being alongside today. You can find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM. Also, scottbertram.com for all my media doings. SteveGruber.com and at Steve Gruber Show. Don't forget the website. Click the podcast tab. You'll find all these interviews from today. You want to share with friends, listen to something again, find it there at stevegruber.com or wherever you find your audio. This portion of the program brought to you by Sawchuck Wealth. Would you trade 30 minutes for an extra $750,000 in your IRA? Join Terry Sawchuck for a live interactive webinar to learn how Sawchuck Wealth helps people reduce their investment costs by as much as 50% and better manage investment risk as tariffs and trade wars threaten the markets. Terry will answer all your questions and discuss simple changes that could put an extra $750,000 in your IRA by retirement. Visit sawchuckwealth.com/Gruber to register for the webinar next Thursday. sawchuckwealth.com/Gruber. Register for the webinar, which is next Thursday. All securities through Money Concepts Capital Corp. Member FINRA SIPC. Also brought to you by Wolverine Water. It's Michigan's premier water treatment company. Wolverine Water, locally owned and operated for nearly 75 years. Find more at wolverinewatersystems.com. That's wolverinewatersystems.com. Thanks to our guest today, Mike Hahn, way back in hour number 1. Ed Tarnowski in hour 2. David Scarlett, Laura Dunn. And then hour 3 brought us Ingrid Jacks and Alexandra DeSanctis. I saw this story. Sign of the Times, a man who was airlifted from Mount Fuji last week and rescued, had to be rescued a second time over the weekend. He went back to get his phone from Mount Fuji. The man from China, rescued from China's most iconic peak April 22nd. He had altitude sickness. 4 days later, rescuers had to go back and get the guy again after he went back to the top of Mount Fuji to get his phone. My goodness. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve. My phone's here. I don't have to find it. See you tomorrow. Steve will talk to you again soon on the Steve Gruber Show.